world is an astonishing place, filled with great beauty, awesome natural features, and countless mysteries. Among these are the great cavern systems of the United States, the world's largest and most beautiful. They range from the stunning elegance of Carlsbad to the uniqueness of Luray. In addition to the major caverns, thousands of smaller ones are found throughout our nation, each with its own distinctive appeal. Visited by thousands of people each year, this mysterious underground world holds a special attraction for most of us, because it is so unlike anything created by nature on the surface. A dark, fascinating world from which we seek answers to many of the mysteries of our planet. Of all the great caverns, one stands alone for its immense size. Extraordinary Mammoth Cave of Kentucky has been designated by the United Nations as a World Heritage Site. It joins such famous world features as the Grand Canyon and the Pyramids of Egypt.
And the appreciation of what Mammoth Cave is comes from the understanding of its vastness. It's cave to the nth power, you might say. And so a big part of our job is to kind of redefine for people what caves are and what they're all about. We strive with the thousands of people that we bring through here to take that expectation and that surprise and shape it into what cave and karst topography is really all about. Mammoth Cave was of course discovered and became renowned because of the large caverns that people can go through. But there's so much more to it. The surface, the river, the forest, the sinkhole plain, all interconnected into this vast, almost organic system that we know as the Mammoth Cave Biosphere Area.
Mammoth Cave National Park lies in west central Kentucky, amidst a vast area of winding rivers and mixed hardwood forests. These contribute to its great natural appeal for millions of its visitors. The park is located a few miles northwest of Interstate 65 and the towns of Cave, Park City, and Horse Cave. The Visitor Center complex, including the famous Mammoth Cave Hotel, is found several additional miles to the north, near the Green River. The main cave access, the historic entrance, is just a short walk away. Mammoth Cave National Park contains the most diverse cave ecosystem in the world, and has the rare honor of being designated both a World Heritage Site and an International Biosphere Reserve. This is due to its spectacular natural and cultural features both on the surface and underground. It's the centerpiece of one of the greatest cave regions in the world. The area, with its multitude of limestone caves, underground rivers, sinking streams, springs, and sinkholes, is known as a karst landscape. Limestone and sandstone rock of the park originated some 300 million years ago from sediments of an ancient shallow sea that covered most of the southeastern United States. The sediments later became porous limestone rock, from which the powerful forces of water dissolved and carved out Mammoth Cave. The cave exists in its present form mainly because of the Green River and the fact that it lies within the heart of America's largest limestone region. Together, they set the stage for the complex geological process that created Mammoth Cave. As tiny crevasses developed in the hard sandstone cap, acidic water seeped downwards through millions of tiny cracks in the limestone layers, and over a period of millions of years, dissolved more and more limestone, creating ever larger channels and caverns. The water sought the level of the Green River and flowed into it. As the river cut deeper, the water table dropped, emptying the older levels. With each drop in the river level, new underground drains and caverns formed at levels lower than the older ones, a process that continues today with the Echo and Roaring rivers. Thus, the oldest passages are closest to the surface and the newest at the deepest level. Eventually, accumulating sediment raised the level of the river and re-flooded the lowest cave level. The countryside outside the park is laced with tens of thousands of sinkholes that range up to 1,000 feet across and 100 feet deep. Some of these open directly into caves below. There are very few surface streams in this area. Instead, you'll see countless crater-like depressions which drain runoff quickly into the limestone aquifer. Caves below carry away the dissolved limestone. The surface soil settles, creating the bowl-shaped depressions known as sinkholes. If a drain becomes plugged and the water is unable to drain, a pond forms. Occasionally, the drain becomes unplugged and a large pond will disappear overnight. The southern entrance is one of several popular ways to reach the heart of the park and the visitor center. Driving northwest, you will begin a gradual climb, ultimately reaching the Mammoth Cave Plateau. This is covered with sandstone caprock that protects the limestone and caves below from erosion. There are two amazing worlds to explore at Mammoth. One is underground and the other above. The heart of the park is reached at the visitor center with its complements of a hotel, gift shops, and other facilities. The National Park Service offers a variety of ranger-guided tours of Mammoth Cave. The most popular is the historic tour that begins near the visitor center and takes the visitor along a picturesque trail through a wooded glade, sometimes catching a glimpse of native wildlife. For a better perspective, let's open up the Mammoth Plateau and see where the major entrances and points of interest in the cave are located. At one end is the historic entrance with the Echo River at the lowest level of the caverns. The frozen Niagara entrance is at the other end with the snowball room between the two entrances. The popular historic tour offers a wide variety of many of the cave's most exciting points of interest, including much of the story about Mammoth's prehistoric past. It covers 2 miles and takes about 2 hours. A 140-foot descent carries the visitor down into the natural entrance past piles of rubble from ancient rock falls. Mammoth Cave was entered first by Indians about 4,000 years ago. According to legend, the first European, a hunter named John Houchin, chanced upon the cave sometime before 1798 while chasing a bear. The historic or natural entrance opens almost directly into a vast underground room known as the Rotunda. This area of Mammoth played a dramatic and historic part in American history. Long before the caves were visited by tourists, saltpeter, a major ingredient in gunpowder, was mined here. The huge quantities of saltpeter produced made a significant contribution to the successful outcome of the War of 1812.
The historic significance of this room is the pit area where we're standing. You may want to focus down below. There are several square areas called leaching vats, and this whole area inside Mammoth Cave was very important for American history. This operation was an emergency saltpeter mining operation that began in 1811. And the reason why saltpeter was so important is because it's one of 3 basic ingredients that is needed to make gunpowder. The year 1812 was a time when the United States, a very young country, was at war with Great Britain.
Water was a necessity to leach out saltpeter from the soil, and there was no water. So it was necessary to pipe it from the surface by tulip poplar logs that were hollowed out by hand. The log joints were tapered to prevent water loss. The structures and timbers that you see today have existed here for over 185 years. During those early times, the sounds of black slaves and their ox carts echoed down the long corridors of this sunless world, similar in many respects to this early photo of Park Service trail improvements. Since the earliest days, blacks have had a long and illustrious history at Mammoth.
Stephen Bishop arrived at Mammoth Cave in the late 1830s following about 20 years of white men guiding tours, and Stephen began a 100-year continuum of black guides here at Mammoth Cave. When he came to the cave, he really broadened the horizons of the cave system and found new passageways, underground rivers, eyeless fish. And along with him came 2 friends, Matt and Nick Bransford, who married and had descendants who continued to guide here for another 10 decades. These fellows were very, very good at what they did, and they helped, I think, to establish Mammoth Cave's reputation in the mid-1800s as a place to be or a place to visit.
Guide traditions continued when Mammoth Cave became a national park in 1941. By selecting dedicated people who loved their work and thoroughly understood the caverns, they have kept the tradition of making these tours educational and highly enjoyable for everyone. This photo of Mammoth's guide force was taken in the 1930s. East of the rotunda lies the immense Broadway, a great avenue created over 1 million years ago by an underground river and then abandoned as the water table dropped to another level. Along the way are many reminders of those mining days of long ago. This marker on the limestone wall of Broadway is for guide Ed Bishop, an early 20th century guide and explorer, and a descendant of Stephen Bishop. These large corridors are referred to as canyon passages. As a rule, they are formed by slow-flowing water that either completely filled the passage or were periodically filled with water during periods of high flow. Here at a spot called Methodist Church, where Broadway widens even further, ministers in the 1800s preached from Pulpit Rock to congregations 20 feet below.
This is called the Pulpit Rock. According to their early literature, this was the first air-conditioned church in America.
Broadway continues into areas where condensation may occasionally create a bizarre landscape, complete with fog and clouds. In this area of Broadway, passing more saltpeter mining vats, the great avenue intersects Gothic Avenue. When Shakespearean actor Edwin Booth visited Mammoth in 1876, he delivered a portion of Hamlet from a natural stage atop a large rock at this point. Gothic Avenue has several interesting features, including the unusual registry hall.
In the early 1800s, the guides came up with a technique of getting their work done and making a little money at the same time. They had visitors come in and pick up specific rocks and pile them up in monuments to themselves, to their families, or their city and state. And they literally lined the trails in Mammoth Cave in the late 1800s with monuments to their homes and families. And Will Garvin might say, Mr. Smith from Cincinnati, Ohio, would you and your lovely wife and children love to build a monument to Cincinnati? You can do that for just $1 nickel. I'd be glad to let you do that. And of course, Mr. Smith standing here and seeing the Kentucky monument that goes all the way to the ceiling would feel compelled to take care of Ohio's reputation, and they'd gather every rock that Will pointed out, and for only a nickel, help clear the trail and build a monument to Cincinnati. It was funny too, because after a short period of time, visitors even realized that they could do this beforehand, and they would bring in ready-made signs with their family name or their city or their school painted on or carved in, and they would leave it stacked high on top of their pile of rocks. Well, the signatures here in Gothic Avenue and in the rest of the cave stand as a symbol, really, of the personages who came here in the early years of the 19th century. To take them away would be erasing part of the time capsule that we're trying so desperately to take care of, to conserve and protect.
The bridal altar seems to rise up from the dirt of an ancient stream bed, like the pillars of a Gothic cathedral. In 1880, this room was described as a chapel in the Gothic arcade, with an altar before which once stood a runaway bride. Further east along Broadway, ancient Indian artifacts have been remarkably preserved by the cave's cool air and stable humidity.
We know that from the evidence that we found in the cave, the digging sticks and hammerstones, that approximately 4,000 years ago people came in the cave to mine cave minerals, to mine the gypsum crusts that form naturally on the cave walls and the drier passageways, and also to mine sort of a family of minerals known as selenite that were dug out of the cave soil. There are places in the cave somewhat similar to this where there are ledges, many of them higher up than this ledge, where we know that these people brought in log pole ladders and scampered up the poles and both collected the gypsum crust by hammering it off the wall, as well as taking digging sticks and digging the selenite out of the cave sediment.
The National Park Service provides a variety of talks and tours in the cave. This lantern tour gives the visitor an opportunity to see Indian artifacts, such as this gourd fragment, in a different light. A wide assortment of ancient artifacts lies scattered along the passageways. In almost total darkness, early people labored with only the faint light from cane reed torches illuminating a world that must have been both frightening and mysterious. Even with all these challenges, artifacts from these people have been discovered in over 30 miles of passageways. Naturally preserved human remains have also been found, one trapped beneath a massive rock.
The very first people ever to come inside of Mammoth Cave were Native American Indians. Coming into the cave throughout a 2,000-year period, from 2,000 to 4,000 years ago. These people plucked these cane reeds from the surface. They still grow today down by the banks of the Green River. They would take about a 3-foot section, maybe 3 or 4 reeds, bundle them together, and then light them on fire and come inside the cave. And they found that these reeds, a 3-foot section like this, would probably burn with a good light source for about 1 hour. Now, when the War of 1812 had ended and the saltpeter mining operation was no longer needed, the owners of Mammoth Cave turned to tours. And the first guided cave tours that we know of go back to the year 1816. Now, back in those days, your guide would have been equipped with a whale oil lantern. Now, to assist the guide in showing you the cave, the guide would carry a torch stick. And this is about a 2.5-foot stick made out of hickory, has a steel nail in the end of it, and the torch would be cloth soaked in kerosene or lard oil. And the guide would twirl the burning torch and then throw it up into the recesses of the cave in order to light up the passages. Because you see, with a light like this, it would be very hard to light up the cave. Prior to 1991, this was something that we recreated inside the cave. The last torch thrown inside of the cave was December 31st of 1990. And the Park Service changed their policy on torch throwing at that time because they could see that the smoke was damaging the resource. Around the turn of the 19th century, had much better light source, and they used kerosene. The kerosene had a much cleaner burning fuel, didn't tend to smoke up the cave like the whale oil or the lard oil lamps did. Also, there is a nice protective globe around the flame to prevent the wind from blowing it out. And this is what the cave explorers and the people on tours would use to see as they went through the cave. You see, there was no electricity in Mammoth Cave until about the 1950s and 60s.
A giant rock shaped like a mighty sarcophagus has appropriately been named Giant's Coffin. Some 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, its great bulk rests under the cavern ceiling from which it was dislodged eons ago, looking much like the coffin of some imaginary Goliath. In 1839, Dr. John Crawn purchased Mammoth Cave. In 1842, he had constructed within the cave a number of stone and wood huts for the treatment of tuberculosis. He felt the moist air and stable temperatures might help them. 15 patients were admitted, and all succumbed to the disease. Unfortunately, Dr. Crawn himself was claimed by the disease in 1849. 2 stone tuberculosis huts remain, preserved as reminders of his medical efforts. Many of Mammoth's formations have colorful backgrounds. This column is known as Jenny Lind's armchair. It was named, as the story goes, after the famous Swedish nightingale who sat in it while she sang to a group of visitors in 1852. Echo River is found at the lowest level of Mammoth. It is a flowing body of water varying from 20 to 50 feet wide, running for miles through the depths of the cave. For decades, Echo River trips were available on a 20-seat flat-bottomed boat propelled by a boatman with a long pole, as shown in this 1915 photo. The trips were discontinued in 1993 due to environmental concerns. The Dead Sea remains pretty much today as it was in the 1930s when this photo was taken. In 1880, it was described as waters of a sullen sea which was skirted by a precipitous narrow trail, some 50 to 60 feet above the water below. Occasionally, due to flooding, the water may rise to cover the trail.
I'm standing here in the passageway that leads down to the Echo River. Right now I'm at the Dead Sea. Behind me the trail leads on down to Lake Lethe. Right now the trail is covered with water. The Green River has flooded and backed water up over the cave trails leading to the deeper portions, which is known as Echo River. Right now the Green River is 28 feet above normal.
In the past, water levels have risen even higher, leaving their mark on the cavern walls.
During the flood of 1962, water levels reached 57 feet above normal.
Far below the surface, cloaked in impenetrable darkness, the never-ending task of rushing water goes on, constantly dissolving out new crevasses, enlarging and shaping new corridors. Man seldom ventures into these remote and sometimes forbidding regions. But at Mammoth, cave scientists often check for pollution, carefully monitoring the health of the delicate cave ecosystem.
Water is the unifying theme at Mammoth Cave. Everything we see on the surface and subsurface are due to the effects of water reacting with the limestone. On the surface, the karst topography, with the sinkholes, sinking creeks, ridges, valleys, and springs, are all due to water dissolving the limestone. Here in the subsurface, the same is true. All the passages you see, all the formations are all due to the effects of water and limestone reacting. Behind me is River Styx, one of several streams at Mammoth Cave. The same waters that created the cave also carved out this river. These waters also seen the evolution of the most diverse aquatic cave ecosystem known anywhere in the world.
Most visitors are amazed to learn that this is not a lifeless world. To the contrary, about 130 species are regular inhabitants, and of these, roughly a third are fully cave adapted. Isla's cavefish are a good example of cave-adapted life. They glide easily through the dark pools of Mammoth Cave in search of small crustaceans they feed on. Cave crickets are considered a keystone species since so many other kinds of life depend upon their eggs and guano for food. They live mostly underground, but surface at night to feed. Animals such as bats, birds, and pack rats use the cave for refuge only. This black beetle feeds almost exclusively on cave cricket eggs in upper-level passages. These animals have become so adapted to their cave environment that they cannot survive in the outside world. Animals such as fish and crayfish must still depend on the outside world for organic matter, carried to them by water from above, or surface animals that bring food or become food themselves. The physical difference produced by two different environments is obvious when a comparison is made between two crayfish, one an outsider and the other a smaller full cave dweller of a similar species. One of Mammoth's unique features is its giant pits and domes created by falling water. Side Saddle Pit is one such example. Over 40 feet deep, it has been carved by cascading water over eons of time. It is an exciting adventure, walking through these rugged tubular corridors, exploring deep into the depths of the cave to reach Bottomless Pit. Outside of Mammoth Dome, 105-foot-deep Bottomless Pit is one of the largest and deepest of the many vertical shafts at Mammoth. It was here that the famous guide Stephen Bishop crawled over this awesome pit on a ladder. These shafts are called domes when you're looking up from the bottom, and pits when looking down into them from above. Where water is able to flow vertically through a break in the caprock, such as through a sinkhole, vertical shafts are formed, with some reaching widths of 30 feet and depths of more than 200 feet. Nearby, an aptly named corridor is called Fat Man's Misery. It is particularly enjoyed by youngsters who delight in its many twists and turns and have no worry about getting stuck. Small passages such as these were carved by fast-flowing water, whereas the larger corridors with sweeping curves have been formed by large, slow-moving currents. Narrow, deep passages such as Sparks Avenue have been cut by fast-flowing water. Sparks Avenue, which leads the visitor to Mammoth Dome, displays a good example of scallops, which are mostly created by fast-flowing water. The size of the scallops and their shape indicate the swiftness of the water flow and its direction when these corridors were formed long ago. The majestic ruins of Karnak, named for an Egyptian temple, are part of the Mammoth Dome formation. The historic tour area of Mammoth is mostly dry because overlaying caprock presents the seeping of rainwater from the surface. Water laden with dissolved limestone is necessary to create the carbonate formations that most visitors expect to see in caverns. But there are wet areas here too, especially at Mammoth Dome, where some walls are covered by large flowstone deposits resembling lacy waterfalls. Ancient fossils called crinoid stems are embedded within these deposits, evidence of a form of ocean life from prehistoric times. The high point of any visit to Mammoth is the awesome spectacle of the vast 192-foot-high Mammoth Dome, towering overhead. The story of the cave's creation is told by water such as this, dripping incessantly from a distant ceiling, slowly dissolving the limestone, carving, enlarging while wearing away the rock. This laborious process has continued for thousands of years and continues to this very day. Within the giant dome, a vertical staircase known as the Tower not only enables visitors to experience the added excitement of viewing Mammoth Dome from another height, but carries them up to a different level of the cave. Traveling back toward the rotunda, large canyon-shaped Audubon Avenue is carved by slow-flowing water. It dwarfs the visitors as they draw near the end of the historic tour. Concluding this portion of the cave's exploration, the visitor has had not only an exciting underground adventure, but has also become familiar with Mammoth's fascinating hydrology and historic past. From earliest times, it was doubted that explorers would ever find the end of Mammoth Cave. With more than 350 miles already explored, new passages and caves are continually discovered. When this old photo of the historic entrance was taken in the 1930s, only 58 miles of known cave passages existed. The natural entrance is the closest to the visitor center, but it is only one of several cave entrances. Bus transportation is used for other tours that travel to more distant points, such as the New, Carmichael, or Frozen Niagara entrances. All tours begin at the visitor center. One of the most popular that is normally offered year-round is the Frozen Niagara Tour. Visitors enter through the New entrance and the tour ends at the Frozen Niagara entrance. If you are claustrophobic or have a fear of high places, this may not be the place for you. Although there's no danger involved, the descent down some 300 steps is through some very narrow passageways. But it is a delight to most visitors, and the rewards later on make it all worthwhile. You are actually descending down through a sinkhole to reach the lower cave levels. The easy descent is fascinating. The limestone walls are wet and dripping, and in many places you cross over and through deep vertical shafts. The modern steel trail passes directly through a large dome pit known as King Solomon's Temple, which has been carved out by the forces of water still at work today. The ceiling towers high overhead, while the bottom of the pit lies far below. This tubular passage or corridor is known as the subway and leads to Grand Central Station.
Station is where we're going to have our spawn, so go ahead and grab a seat on the bench. We came through a series of 14 vertical shafts to get to this room. Now, as we came through those shafts, you saw lots of water, you heard water, you actually felt the water. But we didn't see any stalactites or stalagmites, did we? And the reason is because that water is coming in too fast. When water comes in quickly like that, it can't redeposit those formations, but it can dissolve away the limestone and carry it away to lower depths in solution. But the secret is up above us, and that is a cap rock, about a 50-foot thick layer of sandstone mixed in with beds of shale called the Big Clifty Sandstone, and it keeps the water, in most cases, out of Mammoth Cave. Right here, the roof is intact, and really, this is what most of Mammoth Cave looks like. Big passageways, dry passageways, but void of those stalactites and stalagmites. But those formations will be coming eventually. That will be the third face of Mammoth Cave that we see towards the end of the trip.
Our trail passes through this giant corridor with sharp canyons on both sides of the trail. Appropriately, it's called Lover's Leap. Nearing the frozen Niagara section of Mammoth, a visitor traverses the length of College Heights Avenue, past ancient rock falls from a distant time. And then the climatic moment of this tour, the magnificent frozen Niagara, a vast complex of folded draperies so large that it seems to block our path.
The frozen Niagara Formation is a flow stone that was caused by very slow-moving water. This particular formation reminded someone of Niagara Falls. You'll notice the the formation looks like pipes coming down beside the trail.
They extend clear from the distant ceiling to the floor of the cave below. The drapery room, discovered in 1923, is located under the frozen Niagara. Here, slow-flowing water has literally encased the room in a multitude of beautiful travertine formations, draping the walls, ceiling, and floor with countless decorations. Stalactites, stalagmites, columns, flowstone, all in endless shapes and designs. One of the most beautiful is the Golden Fleece, a gold-colored deposit of translucent travertine with an astonishing variety of carbonate formations. Giant flowstone and drapery formations like the frozen Niagara have been produced where water in sufficient quantity has dripped from the ceiling and then flowed over the walls and ledges, creating thin sheets of travertine. Nearby, beautiful Crystal Lake sparkles at the bottom of a deep pit amid the continual patter of dripping water. Towering high above Crystal Lake is Moonlight Dome. A break in the capstone far overhead has permitted dripping water to slowly carve out this vast chamber. Near the frozen Niagara, Rainbow Dome rises from a stalagmite-studded base to the impressive heights of its limestone dome. The adjacent area, including the Rainbow Room, is one of the wetter portions of the cave. This is where you'll find the greatest and most varied number of formations. Visitors travel on constructed trails, but are encouraged to wear sturdy shoes as some are steep and may be slippery. Soda straw stalactites grow from ceilings where water drips slowly. These slender calcium carbonate growths can reach lengths up to 8 feet or more in some caves. Where heavy flows of water still containing carbonate reach a gently sloping floor, then rimstone dams and rimstone pools form. Stalactites grow down from the ceiling. Stalagmites grow up from the floor. Each are formed by minerals and dripping water. Because water drops splash when they hit, stalagmites tend to be broader than stalactites. Few have had the opportunity to explore the Great Onyx Cave by lantern, but it is an inspiring experience. The exquisite forms of unusually beautiful formations contrast sharply against the inky blackness of the cave, giving new meaning to the experiences of past explorers that risked their lives probing these depths far beneath the surface. This special cave is brimming with columns that are produced when a stalactite and a stalagmite meet. A variety of special tours are conducted at different times of the year. Among them, Grand Avenue that begins at the Carmichael entrance and exits at Frozen Niagara.
We're here in Cleveland Avenue looking at the gypsum formations. If you look up on the ceiling above you, you'll see the flower-like formations. Gypsum is a calcium sulfate that squeezes from the pores of limestone rocks. It comes in different shapes and forms.
The beautiful fine crystals of angel hair is composed of hydrate sodium sulfate, very much resembling cotton candy.
I'd like to welcome you down inside the snowball room. This is an area where you see gypsum up on the ceiling that takes on the formation of snowballs. It was a Stephen Bishop, an early guide back in the 1840s, that first discovered this room and described it as a room that looked like children had taken snowballs and tossed them up on the ceiling. This is also the area where you can go through the serving line and pick up your box lunch for those of you who would like to eat at the snowball room. We'll follow.
The snowball room is located some 267 feet below the surface. It may well be the most unusual dining spot in the world. Boone Avenue is located over 200 feet below the surface, to the east of the snowball room. It features spectacular rock formations with deep crevasses and canyons.
Canyon passageways that we've seen today might remind you of some that you've seen out west, such as the Grand Canyon.
Along Boone Avenue, Thorpe's Pit provides an exhilarating experience of finding a tumbling waterfall beside the trail. The Park Service offers a tour for mobility impaired individuals that use wheelchairs to get around. It is scheduled daily throughout the year. A variety of special tours are provided during the summer months. Each requires stooping and crawling. They vary from year to year and may include family and wild cave tours, along with special children's programs such as the Trog Tour and spelunking. For those looking for real adventure, the National Park Service supplies helmets and headlamps for real chin-in-the-dirt caving. With their guide, wild cavers get a close-up view of undeveloped passageways by crawling, climbing, and slithering through the cave. By the mid-1850s, Mammoth Cave had become a major tourist attraction. Visitors had to endure the hardships of reaching the area, usually by stagecoach or in an ox cart shuttle from the train station, or even by boat on the nearby Green River, or by train, most often from Nashville or Louisville. By 1840, the old Mammoth Cave Hotel had been built, which soon became famous for its hospitality. Today, the hospitality remains the same, but the facilities are much different. A modern hotel, Sunset Point Lodge, and individual cottages combined with a dining room and coffee shop to offer first-class accommodations, all set amidst the splendor of the park. Gift and craft shops provide the visitor with an excellent selection of interpretive and gift items. The attractions above ground in many ways rival the ones underground. One of these, the meandering Green River, has much to offer the park visitor. A highway river crossing a few miles from the visitor center is provided by car ferry. Nearby, the Miss Green River Boat Tour offers an alluring and educational trip along the Green River, featuring a modernized replica of a Green River steamboat. The crew provides a running commentary on the history of the region and the sights along the way. And there's always the opportunity to view wildlife along the shore. The great forest we see today is mainly second growth with over 80 species of trees, including oak, hickory, maple, and beech. There are scattered remnants of old growth. These serve to remind us of what nearly 23 million acres of forest in Kentucky were once like. All too soon, our fascinating excursion comes to an end. In 1925, Mammoth Cave drew worldwide attention when Floyd Collins, an avid cave explorer, became trapped in nearby Sand Cave on January 30th. The nation became enthralled by the life-or-death rescue attempts to free him from a melon-sized rock that pinned his leg. Despite heroic efforts to free him, including the digging of a new shaft, Floyd Collins died. This pit is the remnant of that 1925 shaft. He lies buried at his home church cemetery within the park. Drainage is an important part of the hydrology story of Mammoth Cave. Underground water in the park emerges at dozens of springs and caves in the Green River Valley. Some flow constantly. Others, such as Sandhouse Cave Spring, are a flood overflow route, becoming active only during wet periods. River Styx Spring drains Mammoth's underground river of the same name, and it is also an overflow route. Its waters originate from farms, cities, and roadways outside the park. During periods of high water, the spring and river are muddy. Many underground streams from the interior of Mammoth Cave discharge their waters through Echo River Spring. The underground water from these passages is forced upward through funnel-shaped openings in the sediment that covers the floor of Green River Valley. This deep layer of sediment was deposited during ancient times, filling the lower level of the cave. The threat of pollution is a major concern in Mammoth Cave National Park. Because of the enormous permeability of limestone, very little filtering of groundwater occurs. Consequently, pollutants from adjacent areas and townships quickly enter the underground water channels through sinkholes and porous rock layers, reaching the caverns where it can have a detrimental effect on the delicate cave ecology. Because of the serious nature of the problem, the Park Service staff works closely with local officials to monitor water and reduce the threat of pollution both within and outside the park. One monitoring procedure involves pouring biodegradable dye into a sink outside the park, which flows through the cave and exits at Echo Spring. At that point, the park hydrologist removes a charcoal container that has been lowered earlier into Echo Spring. The charcoal is then tested for the dye. This procedure is used to map underground streams and drainage basins inside and outside the park. By doing this, they are better able to define aquatic wildlife habitats while tracking sources of pollution and their impact. The Nolan River is the park's second river system. It is downstream and not related to cave formation at Mammoth, as is the case with the Green River. Its main features are great scenic beauty and an impressive wildlife habitat. It's also noted for recreational activities such as canoeing. It is a deep, cool river and thus supports good fishing at its upper end. It is narrow in places and has lots of sunken snags and floating debris. There are a number of excellent hiking trails in the park, including Heritage, Mammoth Dome, and Cedar Sink. Ranger-guided surface walks are also available. The most popular is the handicapped-accessible Heritage Trail. Along all the trails, the visitor is likely to see a wide variety of creatures, both ugly, dainty, and unusual. Along the Heritage Trail, the old guide cemetery provides a nostalgic glimpse of Mammoth's long guide history. Stephen Bishop, one of the cave's most famous guides, is buried here. The trail hikes to Mammoth and Cedar Sinks both culminate at their respective sinkholes. Cedar Sink is the most dramatic of the two and lies within a deep depression surrounded by high limestone cliffs. These high cliffs provide a good view of a cross-section of the limestone from which Mammoth Cave has been created. If a surface above a limestone cave collapses, sinkholes develop. Areas where sinkholes are numerous, such as Mammoth, are said to display karst topography. Even after all these many adventures, there is still more fun and education awaiting the park visitor. Horseback riding within the park is a popular pastime. Riding trails wind their way through dense forests of oak and hickory, populated by woodland wildlife. This is another special Mammoth experience. With the establishment of the Mammoth Cave Railroad in 1886, access to the caves became much easier. Pulled by the engine Hercules, the little train served Mammoth Cave until 1929, when the use of the automobile replaced it. All that remains today is one space of track, the engine Hercules, and one coach, reminiscent of a distant time long ago. There is no better way to end your visit to Mammoth Cave than to attend an evening campfire program hosted by a park ranger.
What this is called a pump drill. Now, a pump drill can also be called a fire drill, depending on the purpose. They would make these stone-tip points to put on the end of these spindles, and they were able to drill holes. The old-fashioned way is take a piece of bone and actually make a bone awl or a bone punch and drill holes. Well, instead, they invented a device that, well, if you saw the point today, made out of stone, it looks like a Black & Decker drill point. We find those in archaeological...
The story of Mammoth Cave began some 350 million years ago, and it is still being written today. It is a complex cavern where water was and remains the dominant force of creation. From the very beginning, underground explorers doubted they would ever find an end to the cave, and it proved to be so. It is rightfully called the most famous cave in America, and perhaps the entire world. Anyone who has explored its wonders, marveled at its diversity, will never forget their experiences of wonder, of creation, and the joy of experiencing nature at its best.